This is Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Hansen, management consultant, and with me co-host Christine Salvo, therapist, certified mediator, and certified hypnotherapist.
Good morning, everybody. Hello.
Good morning, everybody. So Christine and I were having a discussion prior to this episode because we had a very compelling guest, which you will hear on Wednesday, who was talking about the achievement identity. And one of the pieces of that achievement identity gets a little bit more enhanced when it's your own baby that you're driving. So yes, you have your career, but when you're an entrepreneur, when it's your baby, it's your boat, it's your dream, it's something that you're striving for, it can be a little hard not to get lost inside of the achievement of it all and get tied to it. And this sparks something that you may have recognized as the entrepreneurship roller coaster, that emotional roller coaster that comes with, really just doing your own thing and being incredibly tied to it. And I have to say, I'm very excited for this topic today because I come from generations of dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneurs. My grandfather was a real estate broker in a small town in Texas. And my dad, who basically only worked for either his dad or himself his entire life, was a civil engineer who basically built that small town and then went to build a motel and apartments and things like that and lived in that space. And then my oldest sister, owns a horse rescue, and her husband is a commercial real estate broker and works for himself in commercial real estate. So I've been surrounded all of my life by fellow entrepreneurs, fellow strivers through the trenches, so to speak. And it's an interesting place to be because, one, I think a piece of the entrepreneurship roller coaster for me is I've always been I'm not going to say an absolutely terrible employee, but I've always been a willful employee. Nowadays, some companies prize it in their company culture where they have intrapreneurship and people really press for intrapreneurship, but some companies just don't.
Oh my gosh, I can so relate to that. I've been self-employed for, I think this will be my 10th or 11th year now. And I contract my time out. I do some things independently, and I kind of piece together a few different things in the basket, right? So I don't have one source of income. I used to make that mistake, and that really got me in the emotional roller coaster, on the entrepreneur roller coaster. And I realized, soon after I would kind of like go full-time over here, and then for some reason, it may be, I think one year what happened is I went on vacation and I came back and it was June. So in my line of work, its fiscal year starts June, right, of every year. And they had a crazy dip in budget that they weren't expecting and didn't tell me. And I came back to work at a $20 an hour pay cut. Just, there's no choice. Just here you go. Here's your new contract. Either sign it or don't. And when it was my only contract, obviously it was like, gulp, I guess I'm signing it, right? So, you can get yourself in some pickles as an entrepreneur as well.
Absolutely. And there's different levels of entrepreneurship. So there's the entrepreneurship where you're building a company and your goal is to basically one day remove yourself from that which you've built, to retire, to sell it, to whatever your exit strategy is. So it's the building for exit kind of entrepreneurship. And then there's a passion entrepreneurship. My sister doesn't run a nonprofit horse rescue because it's the most profitable thing. I mean, just nonprofit pretty much says it all. She does that, for the real love of it and keeping that sustainable as a roller coaster in itself, because she doesn't have as many employees, but she has volunteers that help out. And the biggest operational strain on her is she's got 38 horses that depend on that operation going. So that's another kind. And then you have, like you and I both do basically gig economy entrepreneurship, and that is growing right now in leaps and bounds. It's the gig economy, the remote work, the ability to piece it together amongst multiple contracts that you have to create this life. And that is kind of like this feast or famine thing sometimes, is like, oh, this contract is going away now. This contract is done. What do I do? I remember in 2013, I started contracting with the state of Nevada and as a communication consultant, and it was an 8-month contract. And I was working with the state of Nevada, and at the end of 8 months, they're like, we need to keep you. And that contract actually reached out all the way until almost 2016. And that was a pleasant surprise. And I had decided in that contract, because it was one of the contracts where I didn't work from home, I worked from the state offices. And I had decided that, maybe the full-time thing wouldn't be so bad again. So for a while, I worked full-time, and I still sort of helped out the state until I phased that out. And then the full-time thing just came slap to the close very, very quickly. And I was found again going, oh my goodness. So this roller coaster is, you got this run up and then you're doing well. And a lot of businesses, the majority fail within 5 years. And I think it's the ability to withstand this entrepreneurial emotional roller coaster that is really the make or break thing, especially as a principal of a company. Because if you can ride with the rails, so to speak, and make sure you're strapped in real tight and that you have that agility and that flexibility to move through those times, that they're just those times and not permanent.
I think that can be correct, but sometimes, sometimes there's dry seasons too. And I think there's so much of entrepreneurship where it's so much planning ahead. So, I had another contract come out in June. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I get the email from the the court secretary going, "Judge wants to talk to you," and I'm like, "Oh man, what's gonna happen?" Because you're on pins and needles. You never know if like in your case, if the state has the funding, if it doesn't have the funding, sometimes they want to keep you, but they can't. It's not always a matter, right? And so this roller coaster, so I remember this just happened a couple of weeks ago. I'm sitting here going like, okay, what's my plan? Because I need to be okay either way. Contracts end, it's not personal. That's just something I think we really need to get used to, is understanding that when you decide to piece work together, it's not personal.
Right.
There's funding, there's not. There's work, there's not. And when you've decided to base your income on other people's needs, well, then that's going to be pretty unstable. So when I'm going through this process, I'm going, okay, what's my plan B? How am I going to replace this income if for some reason the contract isn't renewed, right? Luckily, in my case, it was renewed for at least another year. Now, she said I can't promise next year because last year's budget was already agreed upon starting this year, right, June. But because of the budget cuts and everything going on, she actually can't guarantee next year. So we're on a very year-to-year basis, and they'll do anything to keep the position. But understanding that sometimes businesses just can't survive. But there's so much of this roller coaster. And what we're really kind of talking about is not just the financial, but the emotional side of this, right? What happens, in your case when you have the money and then all of a sudden it's a dry spell and then kind of scrambling for what's next. How would you kind of guide some of our listeners through that process as a consultant?
It's interesting because the core of knowing your business is knowing how you're going to structure it. How is your business structured? If you were in a gig economy, so I actually changed my structure midstream because I realized, and I came to this realization by wanting to hire salespeople. I just didn't feel like I wanted to hunt for my food as aggressively as I was needing to. And I wanted to go more into the consulting role versus the huntress role. And in doing that is when I decided that what I had with the state wasn't so bad, and I could be installed at a few different places and piece together this beautiful income without having to always worry about where the next contract is coming from, how long I'm working with this client. And consulting, also to know your industry, because consulting for me, it's needs based, it's limited, it's in terms of what people need from end to end. Some people will keep a consultant on for advice or for process change or for things like that, just to have them, and some, they want to do their project and they want to get out. So, what kind of work did I want to be doing? And I loved the idea of that rolling, ongoing work and that ongoing change. So I started installing myself with clients who had other clients. So other firms, other coaching companies, other entities like that, where I wasn't the one hunting for the new business. So coming into that certainty, I know exactly what I'm looking for, who I'm looking for, and I can sort of start to resource and project plan like that. Now, the downside to that for anyone who wants to have their name on everything is my name isn't on everything in terms of my business name. My business
name. So it's lacking the branding.
Exactly. I'm basically a hired gun.
Yeah.
I'm a hired gun, and finding that, okay, I am great being a hired gun. At one point, probably about 2 years ago, and I've been in business off and on since 2009, absolutely full time, no other source of income for the last actually I'm coming up on 4 years in August. And what I realized is that for a brief amount of time, I was going the build a firm route. So I got a cage code to work with the US government. I started focusing on, okay, how can I build consultants? How can I do contracts? How can I have something to consult or coach? And how am I going to do this? And building that format out of it, what I realized is that in that particular energy, it was always the hunt. It was always the hunt, the grow, the hunt, the grow, hunt and grow, hunt and grow, hunt and grow. And if the contracts weren't clicking, I had to expand and contract the firm. I had to worry about the contractors that I have, and what point does it take and make a lot of sense to have employees, and all of those things that I really had to come into realness with myself and say, what do I want out of the grander scheme that is life? So part of how I deal with the emotional roller coaster is kind of realizing how I want to do life and not just my business.
Well, that makes sense. So I'm looking at this blog that this entrepreneur, this solopreneur, right, on medium.com. And he says, listen, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to feel every type of emotion at some point. I love that he says this. He said, you're going to feel victory and defeat, passion and hate, bliss and stress. You're going to be bouncing from one side to the other regularly in the early days. So I really think it's so important to address these things, because especially right now, we are really in an insecure economy. We don't know what's next. And small business is really being hit the hardest as far as we can tell so far. Mm-hmm. So through everything that we've gone through, a lot of the big businesses, the larger businesses, have actually been able to stay open on some level or another. But it's the mom and pops, it's the little guys that have really been impacted. So this entrepreneurial roller coaster, this emotional roller coaster that comes with being a business owner, it's valid all the time, but I think it's even more valid in an insecure economy when we're just not really sure what to do. So, one of the ways that we're looking at dealing with this is, and I'm sure you can relate to this yourself, is we have to be able to look to the future. There has to be some planning ahead. There has to be some plan B, some plan C, and some reality testing, as you said. If I want my name on everything, but right now it'd be better for me to piece together some work just to kind of make this work for this time being, I may have to kind of put some of that behind and not completely ditch it, but maybe, your contract work becomes your main work for a while you're still working on your brand and you're doing that on the side. But really having to I think when you're an entrepreneur, you have to make some pretty big decisions, right? You have to be able to do these weights and measures in a different way than someone that has full-time employment with a company.
Absolutely, because you have your livelihood that you're working with, but you also have your North Star, so to speak, that you're being guided by. And then two can absolutely jive. It's almost like when you have a full-time job, but you have a passion, so you begin moonlighting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this element of moonlighting. So the installed piece, and I'm resonating with this fully because I have my method. I was really inspired, and I can't wait until our listeners hear the episode on Wednesday. Please tune in, because our guest said, one of the things that you can do to really understand like where you truly want to go is, if you could not fail, what would you do? If you could absolutely not fail, what would you do? And that becomes kind of the North Star at that point. And then, so how do you walk toward that North Star? How do you start stripping away some pieces so you can walk toward that North Star? And I think it's a big realization, especially in times of flux or transition, that we are given the clear opportunity to face ourselves down and change.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's the ability to get really quiet with ourselves, to see, really feel into, am I doing this business because I love it? Am I doing this business because somebody in my family told me I needed to be an entrepreneur? Am I doing this business because all my friends have businesses? That's another thing that happens, is that, with the MLMs that we have, is that somebody's friend gets them into selling this thing. And then there's a whole thing that comes up around it. Like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And I think that's the key right there. Is your business a should? Because if your business is a should, I should be able to hang in here, I should do this, I should do that, get really brave enough to like lean into that and say, why do I feel that pressure around? What is it about that creates pressure for me?
Or as Tony Robbins says, it's got to be a must, right?
Got to be a must. Exactly.
It's got to be a must.
I must do this.
On goodtherapy.org, they're talking about an emotional roller coaster, right? So the entrepreneur roller coaster is a lot about our finances, about our business health. But as you're going through your business roller coaster, you also tend to go through an emotional roller coaster, because our business and finances tend to be directly related to, our stress, if nothing else. Not just our health or our financial health, but your levels of stress. When you're really riding high on that coaster and you just have money being thrown at you. I had someone tell me once it's called mailbox money, when they're just receiving checks, right? Every time you go check the mail, there's just money in it. When you're getting mailbox money, you're great. But what happens when, and in every business, it's different. Mm-hmm. But every business has the when. So there's a few tips that this website is saying to consider. And number one, it's think before you act. Mm-hmm. I love this one, because what we tend to do when we're emotional is be impulsive. Right. We start acting irrationally, and we start saying things we don't mean, or sending emails we shouldn't send, or making those phone calls, or sending the text messages. And we have talked about this on past episodes where, we really have to be careful about what we do digitally when we're not in a good place, right?
Right.
So your business might be kind of going on that south side, and you might be hanging on for dear life. but you still have to keep your head about you. You need to think before you act.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the second one is considering the big picture. Let's look ahead. Let's get out of the day-to-day drama. Okay, I'm feeling this right now. And it's very intense and all of this, but 5 years from now, I always love that analogy. 5 years from now, how important is this going to be? Well, especially, in times like what we're facing right now, what's really going to be important in 5 years from now is how you handled right now. The big picture is, what did you do today to set yourself up for tomorrow?
Right. That also boils down to, how well are you taking care of yourself physically? And I'm not talking about the shoulds of that. I'm talking about, are you eating? Are you drinking water? Are you actually supporting your body? Because one of the go-tos that I have when I get stressed is those things will start to go out the window. They will. To mitigate that risk, I started preparing my meals in advance. So I have meals that I can just go to the refrigerator, I can pull out, I can shove it in there, and in a 30-minute break that I have, I can eat a really healthy meal, and I can actually feel my body shift when I do that. And it's a really interesting thing, and it's so much different than just, I'll just grab this energy drink, or I'll just grab this or grab that. When we start to put ourselves last physically is when emotionally, emotions are just movements through the body of what you're going through. And, you've heard the term hangry. Hangry can splash off into your business as well.
Oh, sure.
So those reactions and everything, when you're not in that space of taking care of yourself, they can amplify. So again, to your point, watch what you do in the digital space, because it's so on demand. When you're maybe in the space where your business is stressing you out, or maybe you're in the space where self-care has slipped a little bit because you're just going. Really watch that. Make sure you're in the headspace for the meetings that you need to attend as well. A lot comes across in energy to be misconstrued. Whether you have a meeting with a customer, or you're at a small retail store and you're just running your store for the day, like really check in and say, where am I right now pre-interaction? Because that can mess with some stuff. It really can. Right. Even just the way people feed off of each other's energy. It absolutely can. I know some business owners who are really struggling right now in their new business development. And part of the reason why they're struggling is because they're feeling the pressure of the need. They need to find new business. If they don't close this contract, bad things happen for their company. And they take the conversation energetically away from the other and their value, and into, how can I make this square peg fit in this round hole?
I always like to say desperation stinks. And I don't mean that obviously in a literal way, but we actually pick up on that as humans with our sixth sense, right? With our energy feelers, with our antenna, whatever you want to call it, our auric field. So whenever we practice that desperation, we're actually pushing opportunity away. No one wants to be, I get this visual of like being roped, like I'm on a horse and I'm a little sheep being roped. Like no one wants to be roped. Like, hey, what's the deal here? Why do you give me so, So remembering that, and even in times of crisis, staying true to yourself, making small changes throughout that day. Part of this emotional roller coaster is we're in routine, like you said, and it's not a good routine. We're not in a happy routine. We're in a routine, but it doesn't mean it's a good one. Right. So maybe taking that 15-minute break, taking a half an hour walk in the middle of the day, making some kind of change that brings on some positivity. That's an energy shift, just as you were mentioning, how that stagnant energy can really start to kind of propel from you and become what people, the taste you leave in their mouth, let's say. So, another tip here is practicing radical acceptance. Just accepting the situation exactly as it is and not trying to change, persuade, mood, control, saying, hey, this is where I'm at. This is where my business is at. This is where my mood is at. This is where my physical health is at. This is where my relationships are at, up and down the ladder. and really practice going, I accept it as it is, not as I would have it. And that's such a difficult thing to do, because in our culture, I like to say the drug of choice of just about everybody is control. So control is the first addiction, everything else comes after. So when we're really practicing that radical acceptance, we're saying, I can't control every situation. I can't control other people. I can't control the economy. And when I can kind of drop my shoulders and breathe into that, there is a little bit of peace that can come next. And it's not that you shouldn't have a strategy. It's not that you shouldn't be prepared. I think you should absolutely be strategic and be prepared. And at the same time, we have to be okay, because if we're not okay, again, desperation stinks. And so either we're going to call in, I hope I get this contract, but it's okay if I don't, rather than the energy of, I need this contract, and if I don't have it, now it's even worse, right? Because we've already stressed ourselves out. We're already in a bad place. And that doesn't give the other person a lot of room to say yes or no.
Exactly.
And we want that open energy exchange where someone can go, I actually really want to work with you, and it feels good, and they feel that desire, rather than like, well, I'll give you the business because I know you're desperate. And I actually, it sounds kind of crazy, but those tend to be the cases that I see in lawsuits all the time. Is someone had an instinct and they said, they gave me the lowest deal, but I knew something wasn't right with it. And then no one actually ends up happy with the situation. And then, I'm all of a sudden seeing this case in court.
Right, exactly. It's interesting when you can really lean into something like that too, and just not try to force it. In the recovery world, as you know, as a therapist, there's the tenet of living it one day at a time. And there is a great piece to that, because if you do your best today and you do your best each and every day, that will end up being a better existence than if you look down the road and you try to plan how you're going to be today based on this thing down the road, which may or may not be, instead of just living one day at a time, letting things come as they do come. And I think that the full version of the serenity prayer here is really applicable, because it's something that business owners, really anyone, but especially business owners at this point in time, can really need and really lean into. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I'd love to read that. And so the original full version of the serenity prayer is, God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. So I think that's really cool. And if you're not a religious person, put in, taking as my mentor would, taking as spirit would have it, or anything bigger than me would have it. Just knowing that it's kind of like the tenet, it is what it is. And if you can sit within it is what it is, and then notice how your body is feeling, notice what your self-care is, just take a quick inventory with that and go, all right, now it's time. Now it's time for me to breathe as I ride the roller coaster, and I get to choose to get off or not. And ride and play.
I'm always a really big fan of journaling, sitting with what's coming up, and don't ignore, because typically emotions get louder the longer you ignore them. And last but not least, lean on your support system.
Absolutely.
Talk to people. Tell people how you're feeling. Don't do this alone. That's the worst thing you can do. Other people will be there. They'll have your back.
True. And if you need help opening up about it, share this episode and maybe use it as a spring point for a conversation about where you're really at with someone you can trust. This has been Business Therapy. healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Hansen, management consultant.
Christine Salvo, licensed marriage and family therapist, certified mediator, and certified hypnotherapist. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.
Have a great day.